How good are Mike Norvell and Alex Atkins as Florida State's play callers?
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On Seminoles. I'm your host, Brian Smith. Thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. We are going to explore play calling, the best in the business of college football, starting in Tallahassee with Norvell and Atkins, and kind of compare. Talk about different eras, different play callers that have come through Florida State and some of the things that go into it, because I think it's diverse. And of course, fans have a lot of opinions about offensive play calling in particular. So that's why today's show is going to be about that as we head into recruiting season starting this weekend. So let's talk about Florida State. Let's give some examples of the history of Florida State and then compare it with what they're doing right now in Tallahassee. When I was growing up, Bowden and his squad had a lot of different guys that were involved in the offensive play calling, one way or the other. Mark Richt obviously was the quarterback's coach. He had Charlie Ward, etc. And he was a guy that figured it out from game to game. They were diverse. They'd run trick plays, etc. The fast break offense under Charlie kind of got rolling in 92. And then finally in 93, he was the Heisman winner on that great football team. I think that is kind of ironic considering today, 30 years later, you're looking at Florida State doing similar. The offense really isn't that much different. It's just ironic because obviously there have been a lot of coaches at the OC and head coach position since then, and Florida State's doing similar things. They're one of the few schools like that. But again, like really, Florida State's fast break offense, they kind of started a trend a long time ago that is now prevalent across the college football landscape. And I think that's pretty cool. Florida State fans should be proud of that. Thinking back to that era too, it wasn't necessarily that it was complex. I remember Bowden talking about they used to run 4 verts on a play, and he's like, they can't stop it, run it again. They just rotate some more good receivers in, and most DBs could run with a guy for a little bit, but like not many defensive back groups as a whole could handle Florida State in a 4-wide set. You don't have 4 corners that are going to be able to do that play after play. You just don't. So Florida State found that, and they found ways to dominate teams. Very few could hang with the Noles, especially outside the numbers. Looking at what I like about this group, though, not that they didn't run the ball well at Florida State then, this group has more power football. Looking at last year's numbers, about 150 yards a game, and they had completely reduced how much Jordan Travis ran, tried to keep him healthy. Obviously, it still didn't work on that unfortunate play against North Alabama, but they could have averaged 180 to 200 if they would have ran Jordan more last year. They tried to keep him out of harm's way. It's not any secret here. Now, if you look at what Florida State is going to with DJ Uiagalelei, that's a telling sign that, hey, we can coach different guys, different styles from year to year. Not many teams could do that. But again, the Florida State teams in the early 90s, after Charlie left, they had some guys that were more pocket oriented. They didn't and even afterwards, like guys like Ricks and stuff, they were better in the pocket than they were outside the pocket. Ponder was a guy that could run around a little bit. There were some that could move, but most of the guys Florida State had afterwards weren't that kind of versatility. The key, though, is still the dynamic plays. The guys that have played at Florida State at quarterback have been big play guys, and the play calling really found ways to get after you. If you took too many risks, you're blitzing, crowding the line, a safety in the box, whatever, they went over the top. And last year, even when Florida State had guys banged up, I'm going to bring up a specific game here in a second, they would do that. Florida State took a ton of deep shots, 20-plus yards beyond the line of scrimmage. The ball travels in the air. That's, to me, a deep shot. Seam ball, fade ball, back shoulder fade, whatever it is, Florida State ran a ton of them. And they had Johnny Wilson and Keon out there trying to catch the passes. That's going to help you. But they had guys like Jaheim. They had guys like Ja'Kai Douglas, who's coming back, etc., that could do it as well. They had plenty of speed. And even when they went to Hakeem Williams, a guy who had, I think it was the Syracuse game, took a short pass and scored. Like, they had plenty of it. So I get why they would throw down the field. I just think that this group, with what they've seen, with the run game, the power football, you're going to see more play action this year than what you did last season. I talked about recently on this show, Florida State really wasn't that great on third downs last year, but they scored a lot. It's not normal to be that way. It's really not. Usually a good third down team scores points. Well, not many teams had. Again, they had abnormal talent at receiver. You can take more chances. It could be 3rd and 10. It could be 1st and 10. It could be 2nd and 10. If the safety was in the wrong spot, they went vertical. Even sometimes they went vertical when it was double coverage and they could make plays because Johnny or Keon would either run by somebody or come up and high point the football. We're just better than you. The key to play calling in those scenarios is allowing it to happen. A lot of coaches, when you have more talent like that, will dink and dunk. Our talent will eventually just make a play after the catch. No reason to be aggressive. Well, Jordan Travis still only had a couple picks last year. I think it was 20-2 or whatever it was. And they'd get in the red zone and they'd run it in quite often, but they got the ball down the field a lot with the passing game. But no other game, as I alluded to a moment ago, was a greater example of why Alex Atkins and Norvell and really the offensive staff as a whole at Florida State have figured it out and why they're one of the best in college football. Pittsburgh. Keon Coleman did not play. Neither did Johnny Wilson. You lose your top 2 receiving targets. That's tough sledding. It's a cold weather game. You're in Pittsburgh, aggressive defense, really, really, really well-coached defensive line. They do a tremendous job there. Going to be a pass rush. I said all week, they're going to run the ball here, take some play action shots, wear down Pittsburgh, they'll win the game, but it'll probably be ugly. I couldn't have been more wrong about what they did. Number one, you got to give credit to the offensive line because they did drop back passing, the polar opposite of what I would have done. I would have made them play run defense, and I would have made sure that my inexperienced receivers didn't have to be in a tough spot. Well, Ja'Kai Douglas went out and had 115 yards, including a longer touchdown, and they picked them apart. That's just the way it is. Maybe they thought that they would just completely cross up Pittsburgh because everybody thought they were going to run the ball without their top 2 receivers. I don't know. But at the end of the day, Florida State was the aggressor. When you're the aggressor, more often than not, it's going to work out for you in the world sport. Florida State absolutely took it to Pittsburgh, kept them off balance all day, quick passes, some deep shots. Sometimes Jordan would move the pocket, whatever. They found ways to keep Pittsburgh off balance, and they won the game pretty handily when it could have been bad. Like if they'd had their 2-star receivers, they win that game by 30 points. Pittsburgh didn't have the players to handle them. But even with the reserves, they threw the ball really, really well. To me, that's the definition of coming up with play calls that matter because most games in college football, as I like to say, 80% of college football is recruiting. It just is. That was a coaching game. There aren't very many of them where you need to flat out coach because the perception is that Florida State's just way better than Pittsburgh. That may be overall, but A, the key guys weren't playing, and B, when you have 2 guys at the same spot, it's really hard to overcome that because then they can concentrate on your other players. Florida State figured it out. That was one of the best coaching jobs, offense, defense, or special teams for any team that I witnessed last year. Florida State should be one of the best by nobody. It doesn't matter who goes out and does a list. They've got one of the top 10 groups, in my opinion, as a head coach and OC. And I'm being conservative, probably top 5 in college football between Norvell, Atkins, and the rest of the staff in general. Coming up next, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the other teams that are good. I'm going to compare a few of them to Florida State. That's next here on Locked On Seminoles. It's time for the NBA Finals coming up, and you got a chance to get some tickets if you want to go. A great place to do that would be Gametime. Gametime is an app that has really easy access. In a couple of clicks, you can find the seats that you want, get a view from where you're sitting, what the floor looks like, what the stage looks like, what the concert hall looks like. It could be just a movie theater. Anything that you're looking for, Gametime has an opportunity for you. But again, with the NBA Finals coming up, this is a way to do it. They got last-minute ticket deals, flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing, meaning what you see on the price does not change at the end when you check out. That's something that drives me completely crazy, and I'm sure it does other people too. I want to know the price up front. You should as well. Gametime allows you to do that. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Gametime. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets guaranteed. What other teams do you think are the best in college football when it comes to play calling? There are some different teams from different areas that I can think of that were great. Nebraska in the mid 90s, etc. But there isn't just one team during this current one that I would say is dominant because coaches move around a lot more. Monken, that was at Georgia, was the best a couple of years ago, but he also had a ton of talent to work with. What other guys besides Norvell, besides Atkins, who else would you throw in? These are some of mine, and I'm going to do a little comparison of what I like or don't like about all of them, including Florida State as well. This is, again, just my opinion. If I could only take one coordinator for like a 2 or 3 year period, regardless of where it's at in the country, I would take Chip Kelly. He's proven. He's taken passing teams in one, like where they just throw it all over the place. He's taken teams that run a stretch offense with the run game in one, and he's done it with mobile guys, and he's done it with guys that are a little bit better in the pocket. It just depends. He's a guy that can adjust. Give him credit for what he's done. I think that's amazing. Most guys, especially with the quarterback position, they need somebody that fits their offense to a T. He had a guy last year, Dante Moore, that came in, was a freshman quarterback, played quite a bit, and another guy that was a veteran. They weren't the mobile guys that you think of with Chip Kelly at Oregon, and he did a great job with the talent they had. I mean, he didn't have Oregon's talent by any means. So give credit to where credit is due. Also, Denbrock at LSU. This is ironic. He was at Notre Dame. He was at Cincinnati. He goes to LSU. He's now back at Notre Dame. But wherever he's gone, he's found a way to adjust. Good with the big ball down the field, similar to what Florida State did a lot last year. That was LSU, and they found ways to make plays. But let's go back to Cincinnati to kind of look at the big box overview here. And by the way, these are almost all are experienced guys. The younger guys only done it for a couple of years. I'm not as interested in them. Denbrock didn't have that kind of talent like he did at LSU. At Cincinnati, they developed guys. The quarterback ended up getting drafted by the Falcons. He had one offer. Cincinnati. He ends up being an NFL quarterback, developed with Denbrock. That's something that tells me he understands coaching, number one. And then he also understands the ability to adjust to his talent. He is a guy that likes to throw the ball vertically, take a lot of shots. But Cincinnati didn't have that kind of talent across the board in depth. Had some good receivers. Some guys ended up getting drafted or at least being at NFL camps. But again, it wasn't like they had 2 first-round picks like LSU did last year. Didn't have the same talent that Florida State did, etc. Just really good. They found ways to win games, though. They were competitive with Alabama in their playoff game. They had to adjust because that's a different level of defense that they were playing. That's the mark of a coordinator that understands who you're going against, game prep, getting your players ready, development, the whole nine. I think Denbrock is one of the best in college football. I'm not an overall fan of what he does in terms of his practice scheme, and I'll get to that in a second, but you can't ignore what Lincoln Riley has done at Oklahoma and at Southern Cal, his last couple stops. The passing game concepts in playing hurry up, putting teams on notice, play to play, tiring them out, keeping linebackers on the field when you're in a formation that puts the defense at a disadvantage. They've done a lot of things really well, and they're effective in like getting guys in and out of the lineup. But all the little things, they do really, really good job. Oklahoma did it. Now they do it at SC. And, of course, he's had quarterbacks. Caleb Williams kind of helps. That guy, I've seen him play live. That's a special talent. But at the same time, the other thing he does, he runs the ball pretty well. He did it at Oklahoma, didn't get enough credit for it, and he did it pretty good at USC so far. They will take a good running back, just like you would see at Alabama circa 1985, a big back, and find a way to matriculate that individual into their offense. That's impressive. But they're not as physical as they probably should be, and here's my key on why I say that. If you want to know how much a team hits in practice during the season, not fall camp, during the season, watch the defense and how they tackle towards the back half of the season. USC couldn't tackle anybody the back half of this last year, that Notre Dame game, and then on. They ended up with 7 wins or whatever with Caleb Williams. Their defense was atrocious. They don't practice the way they should. So I like his play calling, but I just think that Lincoln Riley overall as a head coach is not great because I think he caters too much to his offense. There's a couple other guys that are pretty interesting here. Colin Klein. Now, for those of you that don't know, he was the quarterback that played at K-State, ends up coaching there, coordinator. You got to be more creative at K-State, okay? They don't get Keon Coleman walking in the door, all right? They don't. But they find some good players and they coach them up. They win with seniors, fifth-year seniors, sometimes some good juniors, etc. But you don't see a lot of freshmen coming in there and like make an impact. Cam Davis is not walking in there very often. All right, they're not. But they've done a good job, and that got him the opportunity to go to A&M, and good for him. They do some really unique stuff with the offensive linemen, fake pulling one way, come back through the original hole, keeping teams off guard, and they've got less talent still competing with Texas and Oklahoma year in, year out. Sometimes they win those games. Let's be honest. When was the last time K-State had more talent than Oklahoma or Texas? Probably hasn't happened in my lifetime, but they've been competitive with them. I think he will do very well at A&M, and he's done it long enough now that he's kind of earned it because people knew that he was good, and last year was kind of his final point for me because I still had questions, but they were a little more marked last year, and they were still pretty good. So I think he's got a chance to be a really good coordinator. Curious to see how dynamic they are and if they go no huddle because they're going to have so much more talent in Texas A&M. Also, like Atkins, here's something that's interesting with Florida State with this. He's an O-line guy. That doesn't mean you can't be an up-tempo, get-after-it guy with the quarterback play and run into a huddle, etc. Phil Longo is a guy like that too. He was at North Carolina, ends up at Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin doesn't have Drake May running around. Let's be clear on that. But they're starting to get some players to do it. He's taken an opportunity at North Carolina, did well, got another job at a place that's got a new coach, going to be there a while. I'm really curious with him. I think he's good. I don't know if he's great because right now their talent level on the outside is the polar opposite of Florida State. They don't have it. They got a couple of really good players, and then there's just a major drop-off in physical skill. So let's see what he can do. But they had the running game going in North Carolina too. They'd have 1,000-yard rusher and another guy like 800 yards or whatever. I think he's really good, and it's a really close comparison to what Florida State does. Just simple GT, sometimes outside plays that are basic like zone, or maybe they have one guy kick out or an H-back leading the way. They do different things. It's really not that different than Florida State, and I think Longo does a good job. If Wisconsin's going to have any chance, and I still don't know if they ever will, of getting to the upper echelon of the Big Ten and the new dynamics with USC, Oregon, and Washington in that league, plus UCLA may make noise once in a while, they're going to need really good play calling because they're not going to go out and out talent teams, and there's no more Big Ten West schedule. Tim Cramsley, a guy that you haven't heard of, you probably should look him up. Lane Kiffin, kind of self-explanatory. I'm going to finish with him in a second. But Hugh Freeze is a guy that I want to bring up. He's at Auburn, and he has guys around him that are really good. Derek Nix brought over from Ole Miss. He was with him. He was at Ole Miss himself talking about Freeze. I think he's a guy that is really good with the RPO play calling. Here's a stat that doesn't make any sense, but it did happen last year. Auburn should have beaten Alabama in that game, but at the end, obviously the crazy play happens where Bama gets the Hail Mary. But at halftime, how many passing yards do you think Auburn had? 20. Their receiver corps was terrible. Not bad. Terrible. And he found a way to still run the ball all over Alabama, which has NFL talent all over. And they knew that Auburn had to run it. Quarterback and receivers just weren't any good that day, which was most of the time for Auburn last year. And quite frankly, they found ways with RPO game, short passes, Rivaldo Fairweather, pretty good tight end. They got guys in matchups, even though that Alabama knew who was going to get the ball. I think Hugh Freeze has a lot to do with that. Now he's got Nix over from Ole Miss. That's going to be a pretty good team moving forward, and I think he's a really, really good play caller. Last thing I want to talk about as far as play caller, and it's a little bit like Lincoln Riley, but I'm curious. If you're going to comment on anything from this podcast today, I'm curious about your thoughts here. Lane Kiffin is obviously a Twitter god because he's hilarious. He trolls everybody. Sometimes he trolls himself, but he is a good play caller. And I know there's one guy, I'll leave it out, but thought he was the best complete play caller in college football. A guy that's been around, defense coordinator forever in college football. Fair enough. Here's my question. Much like with a certain man in LA that I just mentioned a minute ago, like, no offense, but I don't think Lincoln Riley's anywhere as good as other people because I don't think they're physical enough in practice, and that hurts them on game day. Lane Kiffin has a horrific record. Horrific in big games and won like one game against top 10 teams. That was when he was at SC. They beat Oregon like 35-31 one year up in UG. Okay. And he had plenty of talent at SC. Is he going to get over the top? Finally, this year, they've got D linemen, they've got edge rushers, they've got more front seven talent than they have forever. Experienced quarterback, ton of guys at the skill spots. And he's really good with the RPO game. He's very similar to Freeze. He's very similar to what, well, really Atkins does, along with Norvell, and finding ways to make the quarterback a threat to run the ball in critical third and fourth down situations. He's good. But why is it they can't ever get over the top in big games against teams that finish in the top 10? What is it? I think it would be interesting just to have a podcast just about him, because he's one of the most unique personalities in college football. And honestly, I don't know if there's anybody that is more difficult to understand than Lane Kiffin. Next up, we're going to talk about the breakout players for Florida State. That's next on Locked On Seminoles. I wrote down a few guys that I think are going to break out for the Noles this year, and it doesn't mean they're going to be elite first-team All-Americans, but guys that take that next step. I'm going to talk about this a little bit on Friday as well, but I want to talk about a couple of players to kind of get rolling. Number one, I know he played quite a bit last year, but it was a really weird situation at linebacker. Two really good players in the middle. They played the majority of the snaps, and then he comes in the lineup some too, and that's DJ Lundy. Here are his stats and some of the things to think about that he did despite not being a starter. DJ Lundy had 54 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. He had 4 pass breakups and 2 more quarterback hurries. What's he going to do as what I'm assuming is going to be the number one role at linebacker this year? If you want to comment on something else, I'd be curious, because I've been thinking about this hard. And I'm not sure. I'll give a range for now, but I think he's conservatively going to be at the 70 tackle mark, and he's got a chance to hit 100, depending on how much they want to use him in the later parts of games and stuff, or do they rest him. I think it'll be probably more likely that he sits out, some of the lesser games and doesn't play a lot of fourth quarters, which is obviously good for Florida State for another reason, which means you're winning. But I think 70 tackles is conservative. 100 is not out of the question. Here's another thing. According to Pro Football Focus, he was as good a tackler in a one-on-one scenario as there was in college football last year. And he wasn't even a starter. That's really miraculous. Tackling some of the guys at the Division I level, when they eye you and you're head up with them and they got a two-way go, that is hard. Unless you've been in that scenario against athletes like that on a basketball court, a football field, etc., that twitchiness is hard to explain, but it is not fun. That I can guarantee you. I don't need anybody to really try to understand that besides watching like NBA point guards. Those are slot receivers at the college level. And DJ can tackle. I think this will be a big breakout year for him. Not that he wasn't good, but I'm talking about he has a chance to be first team All ACC, at least potentially. Again, I don't know if they'll play him a ton. Some other guys might play more on lesser teams and put up bigger stats. So that's why I'm a little weary of that, but he's going to be really good when he's in the game. Another guy that I think deserves an opportunity for this, and it's ironic because he didn't play much last year at Bama, is Earl Little Jr. Playing under Sertan, playing in this defense, playing with the competitive nature that the secondary has for the Noles, he's carved out a niche at nickel. He beat out Greedy. Greedy ends up transferring to Southern Cal. Once again, good luck to Greedy Vance. But at the same time, he barely played. He had like 1 or 2 tackles last year. Bama. Comes into Florida State. The light has gone on for whatever reason. Maybe he got in the doghouse there. I don't know. But he transfers to Florida State. All good. He's playing well. I think he's going to have a big year. He might even lead the Noles in some categories like sacks from the secondary, pass breakup, something like that. He has a ton of talent. 6'1", 185, 190 pounds. If you can play corner at that size, you're in good business. If you can play nickel there, you can eventually make a lot of money because nickel is really hard now. Third, and this is just partially me being like, well, finally, he kind of deserves it after getting the hose and the NCAA gave him. And the other part's just that I know he's talented. That's Mr. Jackson. Daryl's a big dude, 6'6", 300 plus pounds. He's from the greater Tallahassee area. He transferred in. This is a guy that deserves a chance. He got to play just a little bit at the very end of the year, but the NCAA had him suspended. for sitting out, whatever. It was ridiculous. And now he's getting his chance. Florida State needs D tackles. So it's a great story waiting to unfold. I think he's going to be Florida State's most important, not necessarily greatest statistical, but most important defensive lineman. And this is why. You can't teach the size. And something that any coordinator, offensive line coach, quarterback coach will tell you, big guys like that just can't hit your quarterback. They can't. So his stats may not be unbelievable. I'll give my projection on him here in just a second. But he's going to command double teams. Teams are going to slant. They're going to run away from him. They're going to wham. They're going to have to make a concerted effort to change their play calling and style of play when that fella is in the ballgame. He makes an impact before the football is snapped. That's a football player that's worth having on your team all day, every day. So I'm guessing 35 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. He's a big, tall guy, so a couple of PBUs where he gets some deflections too. I don't know if that'll be good enough for all conference. Florida State's got more depth than a lot of other teams at DT, but that's okay. When the money games are on the line, Darryl will be in the game. Florida State will be better for it. So I think he has a breakout year. Jalen Lucas, the young man that transferred from Indiana. He's formerly out of the state of Louisiana. I think he's going to have over 600 yards of total offense. I don't know exactly how it'll break down, but I wouldn't be surprised if he had more receiving yards than he did rushing. Now, remember, Florida State at running back is not exactly hurting. Rodell transfers in from Bama. You've got really good running backs coming back, and a guy like Singleton, who was a pretty highly recruited kid, is going to be a sophomore. He's probably not in the top 3. Sam Singleton's a really good player. I've scouted him. He is good. Keziah Holmes is there. This is a great group. Plus, you got Cam Davis. Obviously, Toffoli's probably the most likely starter. I still think they're going to find ways to get Jalen in the game at slot when they take Ja'Kai out. And also, they're going to find ways to run 2 backs. Cause teams to think about playing bigger linebackers because nobody wants to see their big linebacker on Jalen. He's a kid that's sub 4.5 all day, and he's twitchy, and he's a guy that's going to make you miss. I believe that Florida State's going to find a way to get him the ball. It's in pretty basic situations, swing passes. Now your guy has to make a play in space one-on-one with a little twitchy 170-pound guy. Good luck. I think he's going to have a big year. The next one shouldn't surprise anybody. This is Hakeem Williams. And I'm hopeful on this, but it might be a year early. I don't know. But 210 pounds, whatever he is, 215, can run like a deer. Has shown a little bit from last year, but needs to take that next step. And it's about the playbook. It's nothing physical. How much did he dig into the playbook between last year and the time fall camp gets done? Because they're going to be more comfortable with him. The one thing coaches will not do is sacrifice putting more talent in the game if you're not consistent understanding checks after the snap kind of situations where if they do something, you got to adjust your route or whatever it is. If you don't have the mental stuff, they will not play you. They do not care how talented you are. I'm curious to see if he takes that jump. Most guys don't know the playbook as freshmen. That's common. But your second year, if you're going to be a dude, it's about the playbook. Physically, Hakeem Williams can fly. He can jump. He's a guy that can make people miss. He has all the traits to be a National Football League player. And I think he has a chance to be an elite Florida State Seminole starting this year. I got him with at least 30 catches this season, over 400 yards and a few touchdowns. I think he's a guy that could be, along with Benson, the guy that ends up being the stud receiver. He has a chance. He's going up against some other good players in competition, but that's just my opinion. We're going to talk a little bit more about breakout guys and other players that need to have a big season for Florida State tomorrow on Locked On Seminoles. But for today, that's going to do it. Everybody have a great one. Take care.